Unbelievable. At 65, she was betrayed by her children and made a decision that changed everything. Marta was sitting in her favorite armchair, her gaze lost through the living room window. The sky was tinged with orange and pink as the sun slowly set, painting the horizon with colors that, for her, brought more nostalgia than beauty. In the silence that filled every corner of the house, she felt the absent presence of Joachim. It had been 10 years since he had passed away, and although time had passed, the pain of his absence had never truly dissipated. It was like a constant shadow that accompanied her, a daily reminder of the void he left behind. That house, once so full of laughter, now seemed like a strange place. Marta could hear in her mind the laughter of her children when they were small, running through the living room, and the soft conversations she and Joachim exchanged at the end of the day after the children went to sleep. They shared their dreams, their fears, and above all, their unshakable love. "You won't make it," their families said when they decided to marry young and open a grocery store. Marta smiled sadly, remembering the voices that echoed in her memory. She and Joachim had proven them wrong, working side by side to build a life for their children. The small neighborhood grocery store had not only become the family's livelihood, but also a gathering place where everyone in the neighborhood knew they could find not only products, but also a friendly and welcoming conversation. But all of that now seemed so distant. Nina, her little dog, walked slowly toward the couch, as if she felt her owner's sadness. Marta picked her up, stroking her fur as she took a deep breath. Nina was her constant companion, the only being who seemed to understand the emptiness she felt. Ever since she had rescued the little dog from a shelter, she had felt less lonely. But even Nina's company wasn't enough to chase away the loneliness that tightened in her chest every day. The children had grown up. Each one followed their own path, busy with their families and careers. The visits, once frequent, had become scarce over the years. Marta didn't blame them. After all, she understood that everyone had their own responsibilities. But their absence left a void that seemed to grow more and more. She sighed, rising from the armchair with some difficulty. Her knees were no longer the same, and the morning walks she loved had become shorter, limited by pain. Even so, she kept up the routine, tending to her garden in the backyard, where she spent hours caring for the plants she so loved. There, among the flowers and vegetables, Marta found a kind of peace that comforted her, albeit temporarily. As she watered the plants that afternoon, a recurring thought returned to her mind. What would Joachim say if he were there? Would he have a solution to her loneliness? A plan to bring life back to that house? Marta used to talk to him in her thoughts as if he were still there by her side, but the answers, or the lack of them, always left her feeling emptier. At the end of that day, as the twilight shadows covered the garden, Marta returned inside, feeling the weight of another lonely day. With each step in the silent house, she realized how quickly time had passed and how the life she had built seemed distant, like a memory she could no longer touch. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old photo of Joachim she kept in the center. "I miss you," she whispered, though she knew no one would hear. Silent tears ran down her face as Nina, as if understanding the weight of the moment, lay down by her feet. Marta was alone. More than ever, she felt that life continued, but she no longer knew her place in the world. And that night, as silence took over the house, a decision began to take shape in her mind, though she didn't fully realize it yet. Something had to change. She needed to fight for the memory of Joachim and for what they had built together. And above all, for what was left of her own story. She wasn't ready to give up. The weekend brought a rare family gathering. Although Marta was eager to see her children, she couldn't ignore the apprehension she felt. They had planned a dinner at her house, and as she arranged the dishes on the table, she felt a strange unease in the air. Perhaps it was the distance that had formed between them, or maybe it was just her own loneliness speaking louder. Either way, she prepared for a night she hoped would be pleasant, though something told her not everything would go as she imagined. Soon, her children arrived. Ricardo, the eldest, hugged his mother tightly. He had always been the most protective child, but there was something different about his demeanor that night. Maria Clara, her only daughter, followed shortly after, bringing a pie for dessert and chatting excitedly about her children. Pedro, the youngest, arrived a little later with a wide smile and that calm demeanor that always accompanied him. Dinner started off well. The laughter and conversations flowed naturally, but deep down, Marta knew something was unsaid. The silence between some exchanges of glances between the siblings did not go unnoticed by her. They were communicating somehow without needing words, and this began to make her uncomfortable. It was Ricardo who began the conversation that would change everything. After a brief pause, he cleared his throat and, in a cautious tone, began to speak. "Mom, we've been thinking. You've done so much for us and for yourself over all these years. I know the grocery store and the house mean a lot to you, but we think you're pushing yourself too hard." Marta frowned, feeling the discomfort grow. "What do you mean, pushing myself too hard?" Pedro, calmer, joined the conversation. "Mom, you know we worry about you. You've been taking care of everything alone, and we know it's not easy. We want you to have more time to rest, to enjoy life, you know." "Rest," she repeated, her voice already trembling slightly. "Do you think I can't take care of things anymore?" It was Maria Clara, with her gentle way, who finally said what Marta feared. "Mom, you've done so much for all of us. We just want you to have the opportunity to relax a little. We were thinking that maybe it would be a good idea to consider a place where you could be well taken care of, where you wouldn't have to worry about the house, the grocery store, the responsibilities, a place where you could just rest." Marta felt the ground open up beneath her feet. "A place to be well taken care of," she repeated, the shock still reverberating in her words. The idea of being sent to a nursing home, of losing everything she and Joaquim had built, made her heart tighten. She looked at her 3 children, trying to understand how they had reached this point. "Do you think I can't live alone anymore, that I can't take care of what's mine?" Ricardo, clearly uncomfortable, tried to soften the situation. "It's not that, Mom. We're not saying you can't. We're just suggesting that maybe it would be better for you, less stress." But the words didn't ease the pain Marta felt. She stood up from the table, unable to continue the meal. Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I've always worked hard for you. I always took care of everything, even after Joaquim was gone. And now you think the best solution is to put me in a place far from everything I know, away from what your father and I built?" The children exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to handle Marta's reaction. They expected resistance, but not such palpable pain. "We don't want to hurt you, Mom," Pedro said, trying to reach out to her. "We're just worried." "Worried?" She laughed bitterly. "If you were worried, you'd visit me more, help me more. You wouldn't show up here occasionally to tell me I should give up on my life." The atmosphere at dinner had completely changed. Marta was hurt, betrayed, and the children, unsure how to respond, remained silent. Nina, sensing the tension, lay at Marta's feet, as if she knew her owner needed support. "If you think I'm fragile or that I need to be cared for by strangers, you're very wrong," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not ready to give up." With that, Marta left the table, her thoughts and emotions tangled, but with one clear certainty: she wouldn't let her children decide her future. And at that moment, without even knowing it, the first step in her fight had just begun. The days following the family dinner were difficult for Marta. Her children's words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that, in their eyes, she was no longer capable of taking care of herself. The pain of this realization was sharp, but above all, the fear of losing everything she had built alongside Joaquim haunted her. She avoided confronting the children directly. She wanted to believe that it had just been an unfortunate suggestion, motivated by concern. However, something inside her remained unsettled. Marta had learned over the years to trust her intuition, and now it told her there was more behind her children's words. One morning, while organizing the grocery store's paperwork, Marta found a strange envelope on the kitchen table. Her name was hastily written on the front, and she immediately knew she hadn't placed it there. With a growing sense of discomfort, she opened the envelope. Inside was a series of legal documents. Marta read the first paragraphs carefully, but soon her eyes widened as she realized the contents. They were papers related to the transfer of ownership of the house and grocery store. Her children, it seemed, had begun the process of transferring everything to their names without her knowledge. Marta felt her heart race, a mixture of anger and betrayal rising in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she held the papers, as if she couldn't believe what was before her eyes. So that was it. They wanted more than just to suggest she go to a nursing home. They wanted to take everything she had built with so much effort. She let the documents fall onto the table, sitting heavily in the chair. Memories of the struggle she and Joaquim had faced to build that grocery store flooded her mind. At the beginning, people said they wouldn't succeed, that it was crazy for such a young couple to try to support themselves with a small business. But they had proven them wrong. Together, they had worked day and night, taking turns caring for the children and running the store. Now, Marta felt as if she was being betrayed by the very people she loved the most. How could her own children, for whom she had sacrificed so much, try to take everything from her without even an honest conversation? The tears she had been holding back since the dinner finally began to fall down her face. It wasn't just the sadness of being sidelined, but the deep sense of betrayal. Marta took a deep breath and wiped her face, trying to regain her composure. She knew she needed to think clearly. Nina, always attuned to her owner's mood, jumped onto Marta's lap, offering her silent comfort. Marta stroked the dog's fur, trying to organize her thoughts. She couldn't, by any means, allow her children to take away what she and Joaquim had built with so much love and sacrifice. Rising, Marta decided to act. That very morning, she picked up the phone and made a call to an old family friend, a lawyer who had known them since Joaquim was alive. She knew she would need guidance, someone she could trust. "Eduardo, I need your help," she said into the phone, her voice laden with a determination even she had forgotten she had. "Something's happening, and I need to protect everything we built. Can you come over? I want to resolve this as soon as possible." Eduardo agreed to come to her house that afternoon. When she hung up the phone, Marta felt more secure, though still hurt. She knew she would need to be strong. Even if it meant confronting her own children, she wasn't ready to give up everything. It wasn't just about material possessions, it was about her story, the legacy she and Joaquim had left. That afternoon, while waiting for Eduardo, Marta walked through the grocery store and the house, feeling the weight of every corner they had built. She knew the battle she was about to face wouldn't be easy, but like so many other times in her life, she wasn't one to give up easily. The first step had been taken. Now Marta was ready to protect her legacy, no matter the cost. Afternoon arrived, and with it, Eduardo, the trusted family lawyer. When she saw him at the door, Marta felt an immediate sense of relief. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a calm yet firm demeanor. They had known each other for many years, and Eduardo had always been a reliable figure, someone Marta knew she could trust in any situation. As soon as he entered, Marta got straight to the point. They sat at the kitchen table, and she handed him the documents she had found. As he analyzed the contents, Marta watched his every reaction closely, trying to gauge the gravity of the situation from his facial expression. After a few minutes of silence, Eduardo looked up and sighed, adjusting his glasses on his face. "Marta, this is serious," he began in a grave tone. "These documents are ready to transfer the ownership of the grocery store and the house to your children. If you had signed them without realizing what you were doing, you would have lost control over everything." Marta felt her stomach churn. Though she had already suspected it, hearing those words from someone she trusted made it all the more real. "They really did this? My own children," she murmured, incredulous. "How could they even think of betraying me like this?" Eduardo looked at her with empathy, but with the frankness that had always characterized him. "Marta, I can't tell you what motivated your children, but I can help you resolve this. You have the right to protect what's yours. Now, you need to decide how you want to handle this situation." Marta took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her choices. She knew that no matter which path she chose, there would be consequences. Confronting her children meant risking further estrangement, but at the same time, she couldn't simply allow them to take everything she had built with so much effort alongside Joaquim. "I want to protect what's mine, Eduardo," she said firmly. "Joaquim and I worked our whole lives to build this grocery store and this house. I won't let our dreams be taken away just like that, as if they mean nothing." Eduardo smiled slightly, admiring the strength Marta still carried. "I expected you to say that. What we'll do is draft a new will, ensuring that nothing can be transferred without your consent, and we'll take legal steps to ensure your wishes are preserved." Marta nodded, relieved to know there was a solution. However, one issue still troubled her. "And what about my children? How will I tell them what I'm doing? They'll hate me for this." Eduardo thought for a moment before answering. "Marta, I can't guarantee how they'll react. The important thing is that you do what you feel is right. They need to understand that what you're protecting isn't just a matter of possessions, but everything you and Joaquim built together." Those words brought a new clarity to Marta. It wasn't just about the papers, the possessions, or the fear of losing the house. It was about the legacy of her life with Joaquim, about the memories and battles they had won together. And above all, it was about not letting that story be erased or treated as something meaningless. "You're right, Eduardo," she said, lifting her chin. "This is about much more than properties. It's about who I am, about what Joaquim and I stood for, and I'm not giving up." With that firm decision, Marta and Eduardo spent the next few hours adjusting the necessary documents. The new will would be drafted, with specific clauses to ensure that nothing could be transferred without her full consent. Eduardo also guided her on other legal steps, making it clear that from that point on, any attempt to force the transfer of the assets would be invalid. When everything was finally ready, Marta felt a strange sense of peace. Though she knew an emotional battle lay ahead, she also knew that, for the first time in a long time, she was taking control of her life again. After Eduardo said goodbye, Marta was left alone in the living room, Nina lying at her feet. Looking around, she remembered the years of effort, the conversations with Joaquim about the dreams they had for the future, about what they wanted to leave for their children. And that night, before going to bed, Marta promised herself that she wouldn't let everything they had built be undone. She would protect Joaquim's legacy and at the same time create a new path for herself. There was still much to be done, and Marta knew she would need all her strength for the days ahead. But for the first time in years, she felt ready to face whatever was necessary. With the legal measures taken, Marta felt that a great burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She knew that, at least on paper, her legacy and Joaquim's were protected. However, the internal battle continued. Though she was resolute in her decision not to yield to her children, the relationship between them had become cold and distant since the fateful dinner. But Marta wasn't the type to let herself be discouraged. Sitting in the grocery store, which now seemed emptier than ever, she began to think about everything she had gone through. The memories of the early years with Joaquim, working tirelessly to build the business, were always present. The noise of customers, the lively conversations, the laughter. All of that had given life to her routine. Now, the place seemed mute, just a reflection of the past. It was during one of those silent mornings, while organizing the shelves, that an idea began to take shape in her mind. She thought about the elderly neighbors, many of whom had also lost their companions or felt lonely like her. How many of them were facing the same emptiness? How many of them needed a place to feel alive, to share their stories? Marta looked around the small grocery store, and what she saw was no longer just a place of work. She began to see it as a space for social interaction, a place that could be transformed into something bigger. And with that, the idea of turning the grocery store into a meeting point for the community, especially for the elderly, was born. At first, the idea seemed bold. Marta knew it wouldn't be easy to attract people to the place and that she would need help organizing events and keeping everything running. However, the more she thought about it, the more that vision took shape. It wouldn't just be a grocery store. It would be a meeting space where people her age could gather, talk, and maybe even feel less alone. Determined to make this plan a reality, Marta began to act. First, she spread the word among the closest neighbors, explaining her idea of creating weekly events at the grocery store. She suggested simple gatherings where people could have coffee, play cards, or even share old memories. The response was surprising. Several neighbors, many of them also lonely, showed immediate interest. The neighborhood had always been close-knit, and the idea of a space for socializing seemed to attract people. Encouraged by the positive response, Marta began organizing everything. She set aside a small space in the back of the grocery store where she placed some tables and chairs. There, people could sit and chat while having coffee or sharing a snack. The atmosphere of the place soon began to change. The silence was gradually replaced by voices, and Marta realized that little by little, the space was coming back to life. The first gathering was small but significant. Only a few neighbors showed up, but the feeling of having brought some energy back to that place was rewarding. Marta realized that it wasn't just her who needed a new purpose. Those people also found in that place a sense of welcome, a space where they could be heard and where their stories mattered. As the days passed, more and more people began to frequent the grocery store. The news spread, and the small meeting point became popular in the neighborhood. Marta saw that in addition to the elderly, even some younger people started to show up, curious to see the project. There was something comforting in knowing that, even at an advanced age, there was still the possibility of creating something new, of transforming the reality around her. The emptiness that had once filled the grocery store began to be replaced by laughter, stories, and above all, by a sense of belonging. And it was there, in that revitalized space, that Marta found a new purpose for her days. It wasn't just a matter of protecting what she had built with Joaquim, but of continuing to create, of keeping alive the flame of something greater than herself. Nina, always by her side, seemed to notice the change in energy in the place. The little dog, who had once quietly accompanied Marta, now roamed among the visitors, receiving pats and attention from everyone. Over time, Marta felt she had finally found a new direction. She still loved her children, and the pain of their distance still stung occasionally, but now she knew she wasn't alone. The grocery store, which had once been just a business, had become a symbol of her resilience, a place of life and shared stories. And for the first time in many years, Marta felt she still had so much to offer. The The growing buzz around the grocery store didn't go unnoticed by Marta's children. From afar, they observed the comings and goings, the constant visits from neighbors, and began to realize that their mother was transforming the place. This change made them uneasy, especially after their failure to persuade her to step back from the responsibilities of the house and store. One day, Ricardo, the eldest son, decided it was time for a more direct conversation. He called Pedro and Maria Clara to go with him to Marta's house, feeling that as siblings they should face this situation together. On the way, they each shared their concerns, but there was a common feeling that they needed to rescue their mother from her obstinacy. When they arrived at Marta's house, they found her in the grocery store, excitedly organizing the details for the afternoon's event, which would gather the neighborhood's elderly for a small recital. Marta was smiling, chatting with a group of ladies who were already helping with the decorations. That renewed energy strongly contrasted with the image the children had created of a tired and overburdened woman. Ricardo was the first to speak, interrupting Marta's conversation with the neighbors. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice was firm, but there was poorly disguised tension. Marta, sensing the serious tone, excused herself from the ladies and stepped away with her children to the small room in the back of the grocery store. She sat in the chair in front of them, trying to hide the slight discomfort she was beginning to feel. "Sure, what's going on?" she asked, trying to stay calm, though she sensed something serious was about to happen. Maria Clara, always more delicate with her words, began. "Mum, we're worried. We know you want to keep running the grocery store, but we think it's becoming too much for you." Marta frowned. "Too much? What are you talking about? I've never felt more alive in the past few years than I do now." Pedro, more direct, added, "We've seen that you're getting more and more involved with this project, organizing events and, well, we think you're overburdening yourself." Those words echoed in Marta's mind, and for a moment she almost laughed at the irony. Those children who barely visited her now were here, worried about her overburdening herself. She crossed her arms, her expression firm. "You really think you know what's best for me, don't you?" Marta said, her voice calm but full of determination. "You think that just because I'm older, I'm no longer capable of deciding what to do with my own life." Ricardo, trying to keep control of the situation, took a deep breath. "Mom, it's not that. We just want you to have a more peaceful life. We don't want you to wear yourself out for no reason." "Wear myself out for no reason?" Marta repeated, incredulous. "You don't understand, do you? For years, since your father passed away, I've lived with an immense emptiness inside me. The house, the grocery store, everything seemed to be falling apart. And now that I've finally found a way to keep going, to fill that void, you show up here to tell me I'm wearing myself out?" Pedro, sensing the situation was getting out of control, tried to calm his mother. "That's not it, Mom. We just think you don't have to do everything alone." But Marta was already tired of those insinuations. She loved them deeply, but she couldn't allow their limited view of aging to interfere with her decisions. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice firm. "You'll always be my children. But what I built with your father was with our sweat, with our effort, and it's much more than just a grocery store. It's the symbol of everything we fought to build together. And I'm not going to let that be lost just because you think I should be sitting in a chair, waiting for time to pass." The three children remained silent, surprised by the intensity of her response. Those words carried more than just an argument. They were a cry of affirmation from someone who wasn't ready to be forgotten or treated as fragile. Marta continued, "I know you're worried and I appreciate that, but the truth is, I don't need you to make decisions for me. I'm not ready to give up on my life, and this project at the grocery store is giving me strength I didn't even know I still had." The children exchanged glances. There was something in their mother's stance that they couldn't ignore. For the first time, they began to see that the grocery store was much more than just a business to her. It was the connection to her memories, to her past, and now, to her future. Ricardo finally broke the silence. "We don't want you to give up on your life, Mom. We just don't want you to hurt yourself, to wear yourself out more than you need to." Marta looked at him with tenderness, but without yielding. "You need to trust that I know what I'm doing. What I need from you is support, not control. I'm still capable of making my own decisions." The conversation, though tense, brought something important to light. The children finally began to see the strength that still resided in Marta. And although they didn't agree with everything, they knew that at that moment there was no more room to force her to take a different path. They said their goodbyes with mixed emotions, but with a new understanding of their mother's determination. And as Marta watched them leave, she felt that, despite everything, she was on the right path. She had chosen her own journey, and there was no turning back. The impact of Marta's project at the grocery store grew every day. The place, once quiet and almost empty, was now always full of lively voices. The weekly meetings, which had started small, became the highlight of the week for many in the neighborhood. The elderly, especially, found a refuge there, a place where they felt heard and, above all, important. Marta, with Nina's help, was present at every gathering. Even on the most difficult mornings, when the pain in her legs or knees made her question her strength, she never gave up. The energy she received from every smile and conversation shared in the revitalized space was the fuel that kept her firm in her decision to keep going. One of the most faithful attendees was her old neighbor, Mr. João, who had lived there since Marta and Joaquim had moved to the neighborhood. He had also lost his wife a few years ago, and like Marta, felt the weight of loneliness. Since he started attending the meetings at the grocery store, however, Mr. João seemed to have rediscovered a new vitality. He always brought funny stories to tell and was involved in every initiative. In addition to Mr. João, there was Donna Celina, who led impromptu crochet classes, patiently teaching anyone who wanted to learn. And there was also Seu Antonio, who loved to tell old tales, drawing laughter from everyone. The group, which had once seemed to have lost the spark of life, was now more active than ever. One day, Marta realized that the project was gaining more momentum than she could have imagined. During one of the meetings, a group of young people from the neighborhood showed up. Curious about what was happening there, they started getting involved, organizing small cultural events and helping with the logistics of the meetings. The space, which had been primarily for the elderly, was now expanding to integrate different generations. The grocery store, which had been built with so much effort, was gradually transforming into a true community center. And this new phase brought an energy that Marta had never imagined she would feel again. The place was no longer just a business or a point of sale. It was a place of meetings, stories, and above all, mutual support. Little by little, the entire community began to mobilize. People started donating books to the small, improvised library Marta had set up in one corner of the grocery store. Others brought cakes, pies, and snacks to be shared during the events. In a neighborhood where isolation had long seemed to be the norm, the grocery store became a symbol of unity. Marta's project was even mentioned on a small local radio station, which attracted even more attention to the grocery store. Young and old from other neighborhoods started to show up, curious to see the place that had become a refuge for those who needed company and human warmth. One afternoon, during one of these events, while watching the grocery store filled with conversations, laughter, and smiles, Marta felt something different in the air. It was the feeling of mission accomplished, that despite all the difficulties, she was on the right path. She remembered Joaquim, how much he loved those impromptu gatherings in the early years of the grocery store, when the place had also been a meeting point for their closest friends. Marta smiled, imagining that in some way he would be proud of what she had accomplished. But at the same time, there was another reality that Marta couldn't ignore. Her children, though they had accepted her decision to keep the grocery store open, were still emotionally distant. The visits had become rare, and the communication, once so frequent, seemed to be more and more spaced out. The pain of that distance still weighed on Marta's heart. She knew she couldn't force her children to understand what the grocery store meant to her, but in some way she hoped that, with time, they would realize that this new phase of her life wasn't a whim or stubbornness, but a necessity, a way to stay alive, to give meaning to her days. As Marta walked through the grocery store that afternoon, greeting people, receiving compliments for the work she had been doing, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe in time, her children would find their way back to her as well, and until then, she would keep fighting, turning her pain into something meaningful, both for herself and for everyone around her. Marta had no doubt. That grocery store, so simple in the eyes of many, was now a symbol of resilience and community. And more than ever, she knew that as long as she was at the helm of that space, there was still much more to build and to live for. The weeks passed, and the transformation of the grocery store continued to grow. Marta barely had time to think about anything other than the weekly meetings, the events, and the constant support she received from the neighbors. It was a new life she had never imagined she could live at 65. But in the meantime, the relationship with her children remained distant. Ricardo, Maria Clara, and Pedro, as much as they wanted to, couldn't avoid a mixture of emotions about their mother's new phase. Each dealt with the situation in their own way, but in common, they carried a sense of discomfort they couldn't quite explain. Ricardo, the eldest, had always been the most rational among the siblings. He had always been the one to try to solve everything practically, and the situation with his mother was no different. However, even after the last conversation with Marta, he felt that something was out of place. Why was his mother so insistent on continuing to work? Why did she refuse to accept help and instead seemed more dedicated than ever? One afternoon, while talking with his wife, he expressed his concerns. "I know she feels more active with these events at the grocery store, but I can't help but wonder if this is healthy. Are we letting her wear herself out even more?" His wife, a sensible woman, looked at him with tenderness and replied, "Ricardo, maybe what your mother is doing isn't about physical health. It might be that this work, this dedication to the grocery store, is what's giving her a new purpose in life. Have you thought about that?" Her words echoed in his mind, planting a doubt he hadn't considered. Could it be that, in trying to protect his mother, he was actually ignoring what was keeping her alive and full of energy? Ricardo knew that since their father had passed away, Marta had withdrawn, and this recent change seemed to be the first time in years that she truly felt connected to something. Maria Clara, on the other hand, dealt with the situation more emotionally. As a mother of two young children, she often felt overwhelmed and, many times, wanted her own mother's presence in her life. Marta, who had always been the caring matriarch, now seemed distant, absorbed in the events at the grocery store. Maria Clara began to feel neglected, as if her mother were prioritizing the neighborhood and the neighbors over her own family. She tried to talk to her brothers about it. "Doesn't it seem like our mom is leaving us behind? I know she's happy with the grocery store, but I feel like she's drifted away from us." Pedro, the youngest, who had always been the most laid back, listened silently to his sister's concerns. He too had his doubts. However, unlike Ricardo and Maria Clara, he was starting to see the situation from a different perspective. To him, Marta seemed to be rediscovering herself. Although he felt the distance between them, Pedro believed it was part of the process of accepting their mother's new phase of life. I think we're being selfish in a way, Pedro said, interrupting Maria Clara's rant. We've always thought our mother was there to support us, to take care of everything. Now that she's doing something for herself, something that makes her happy, we're reacting as if she has an obligation to continue being the person she always was for us. Maria Clara looked at him, surprised by his response. But what about us? Shouldn't she be more present in our lives, especially now that we have our own families? Pedro shook his head. I understand what you're saying. But maybe this isn't about us. Maybe it's about her finally living for herself. We've grown up, Clara. We're no longer children. And maybe it's time for us to accept that our mother also has the right to do something for herself. Pedro's words touched his siblings in different ways. For Maria Clara, it was hard to accept that the mother who had always been the center of her life now seemed to be going in a different direction. Meanwhile, Ricardo began to realize that the control they were trying to impose on their mother wasn't just a matter of care, but also of fear. Fear of losing her, of seeing her wear herself out, or worse, of realizing that she didn't need them as much as before. The three siblings spent days reflecting on the situation. The tensions that had previously been masked by practical concerns began to reveal themselves as emotional insecurities. They feared that their mother's new phase of life would distance her from them, that she would become someone distant, and that the family's history would unravel over time. However, Pedro was right. Marta had dedicated her entire life to them, and now she was finding something that gave her meaning again. The grocery store, with its events, its conversations, and its stories, had become the new center of her life. And as much as the children didn't fully understand, it was time for them to also accept that Marta's role in the world had changed. Gradually, each of them began to understand that even though their relationship with their mother was going through a transformation, it didn't mean she loved them any less. In fact, what Marta was doing was teaching them something precious, that at any stage of life, it's possible to find a new purpose and reinvent oneself. The days that followed brought a subtle but significant change for Marta and her children. Pedro's words resonated within each of them, provoking deep reflection on their attitudes and the relationship they had with their mother. Although the physical distance remained, especially during the rare visits, a new understanding began to form. What Marta was building in the grocery store was more than just a personal project. It was her way of finding new meaning in life. It was on a Sunday, shortly before another event at the grocery store, that reconciliation began to take shape. Marta was arranging the tables in the newly revitalized space, with the help of some neighbors who had become her close friends. The air was light, filled with the anticipation of an exciting afternoon, and Marta, though tired, felt happy. As she adjusted the flowers in the center of one of the tables, she heard the sound of a car stopping outside. When she looked out the window, she saw something that completely took her by surprise. Her 3 children were getting out of the car, accompanied by their grandchildren. Marta blinked a few times, trying to process what was happening. They hadn't said they were coming. Her heart raced. It had been a while since the 3 had been together there, and the fact that they were with the children only made the moment more unexpected. As they entered the grocery store, the lively atmosphere suddenly fell silent. Everyone knew about the tension between Marta and her children, and their arrival was something no one expected. Marta, still holding the flowers, stood still, looking at them, unsure of how to react. Ricardo was the first to approach. With slow steps and a look full of what seemed to be regret, he smiled shyly. "Mom," he began, his voice low, "I think we owe you a visit, don't we?" Marta, still speechless, looked at her other 2 children. Pedro was right behind him with a calm smile, and Maria Clara was holding one of her daughter's hands, who was looking around, fascinated by the hustle and bustle of the place. "You came for the event?" Marta asked, her voice slightly trembling, not knowing what else to say. Maria Clara took a step forward. "We came to see you, Mom, and we also want to see what you've been doing here." Those words carried more than just curiosity. There was in them an acceptance, an attempt at reconciliation, to understand what had, until then, seemed so far from their own lives. Marta took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and emotion. "I'm glad you came," she replied with a sincere, though still restrained, smile. "I was starting to think you weren't interested." Pedro, always the most direct, came closer and placed his hand on his mother's shoulder. "We've had time to think, Mom. And I think we were wrong about a lot of things. We wanted to control everything, but we're realizing that what you're doing here is important, not just for you, but for all these people." Marta felt her eyes fill with tears. Those words, so simple and honest, were all she needed to hear. As much as she had fought to continue her path alone, the approval and support of her children was still a burden she carried, which now seemed to dissipate. She looked around, seeing the curious faces of the grandchildren who had never seen the grocery store in this way, and finally she turned to her children, allowing the tears she had been holding back to finally fall. "I didn't want you to think you were being left behind," she confessed, her voice choked. "I just needed to find something that made me feel alive again. After your father was gone, I was so lost. And when I started getting involved with the community with this project, it was like I had found a new purpose. I know I wasn't clear with you, and I'm sorry for that." Maria Clara stepped forward and hugged her. "We understand, Mom. It took a while, but we understand." And in that hug, the distance that had existed between Marta and her children began to disappear. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, nor marked by grand gestures, but there was a tenderness and mutual acceptance that couldn't be denied. The grandchildren ran to explore the grocery store, laughing and playing, while Marta, Ricardo, Pedro, and Maria Clara finally sat down at the table to talk. Little by little, the conversation flowed, and the tensions that had once seemed insurmountable dissipated, giving way to a renewed understanding. By the end of that afternoon, Marta realized that although her relationship with her children would never be the same as when they were young, it had evolved. Now they were reconnecting as adults, with their own lives, but with a new respect for the choice she had made. Marta was no longer alone, neither in the physical sense nor the emotional one. That night, as she closed the grocery store after the event, Marta looked at the small space, now empty but still full of life. For the first time in a long time, she felt that everything was in its place. And with a serene smile on her face, she knew that from now on she could move forward, with the support of her family and the community she loved so much. The weeks that followed the reconciliation were the most peaceful Marta had experienced in a long time. Her relationship with her children was renewed, and the visits, though still spaced out, were more meaningful. There was no longer the weight of control or the fear that she was wearing herself out needlessly. Her children finally understood that what she was doing at the grocery store was vital for her well-being and, more importantly, for her happiness. At the grocery store, the movement continued to be intense. The weekly events were no longer just a gathering of the elderly. Young people from the neighborhood began to frequent it, helping with the organization and suggesting new ideas to expand the activities. That place, once so silent, now buzzed with life, with stories, and with new dreams being shared every day. As Marta walked through the grocery store, she felt a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. The space she and Joaquim had created with so much effort was now becoming something much greater than she could have imagined. It was more than a business. It was a meeting point, a support network, a living legacy. Her children, in turn, began to participate more actively in the activities. Pedro helped with the logistics of larger events. Ricardo contributed ideas for modernization and improvements to the physical space. And Maria Clara, with her careful touch, organized small bazaars and art exhibitions made by the neighborhood children. What had started as Marta's project was now something shared with her family and the community. There was one day, in particular, that marked this new phase for Marta. The grocery store was busier than ever, with a book exchange fair organized by the children. The space buzzed with energy, laughter, and interaction between different generations. Marta, watching everything from a corner, felt a hand gently rest on her shoulder. "You did it, Mom," Ricardo said beside her with a sincere smile. She looked at him, surprised. "Did what?" "Turn the grocery store into something much bigger than any of us imagined. It's incredible what you've done here." Marta smiled, her heart full of pride. "I just wanted to find a purpose, something that made me feel alive again. But I think, in the end, I found much more than that." Ricardo nodded, watching the children run from one side to the other, laughing and exchanging books. "You left a legacy, Mom. A place that will continue to live even after us." Those words touched Marta deeply. She knew he was right. What she had created, with the help of so many, was something that would transcend her own life. When she and Joaquim started the grocery store, they could never have imagined that the small business would become a symbol of unity, support, and community. As the event continued around her, Marta felt an inner peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew that the future would still bring challenges, that life would continue to have its ups and downs. But now, more than ever, she was at peace with her choices. She had done her best, both for her family and for herself. That night, after the event, as she closed the doors of the grocery store, Marta paused for a moment to look at the empty space. The neatly organized shelves, the arranged tables, and the echo of conversations that still seemed to reverberate through the walls. She knew that this place, which had once been just an extension of her home, was now much more. It was a part of her story, of the love she had for Joaquim, and of the effort she had dedicated to her children. Marta sighed, satisfied, and turned off the lights, knowing that she had fulfilled her purpose. As she left the grocery store, Nina followed her, as always, and the two walked together to the house. When they arrived, Marta lay down with a smile on her face, remembering everything she had accomplished. The challenges, the struggles, the pains, and the joys. Everything was part of a life well lived. She had learned throughout her journey that it was never too late to reinvent oneself, to fight for what one believes in, and to build something meaningful. And so, that quiet night, Marta fell asleep in peace, with a light heart, knowing that she had left her mark on the world and that, in some way, her story would continue to inspire those around her. Marta's legacy, built with sweat, resilience, and love, was now etched in the walls of that grocery store and in the hearts of everyone who knew her. And in the end, she left this world knowing that she had lived intensely and that her choices would not be forgotten. And so ends Marta's emotional journey, a story of strength, resilience, and legacy. If you connected with her journey and enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Oh, and to make sure you don't miss anything, turn on the notification bell to get alerts for upcoming videos. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in Marta's place? Would you have the same courage to turn something simple, like a grocery store, into a community gathering spot? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Share this story with anyone you think might be inspired, and stay tuned, because we'll always have new content that will touch your heart and make you reflect. Until next time.